So who are or were or can be an apostle, and what are they?
Cambridge had a very remarkable institution that doesn't really have equivalents anywhere else. The Cambridge apostles are, because it still exists, a society of extreme intellectual exclusivity. It dates back to the 19th century. It was an intellectual discussion society. Members would meet, give papers, be brilliant, eat sardines on toast. That's about it. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But it was really and remains one of the most prestigious societies that one could be elected to. And the process of election was an arduous one. Only rarely were elections made, so the apostles remained relatively few in number. It was probably at the height of its intellectual influence in the 1910s and 1920s, when John Maynard Keynes, certainly the most influential economist of the 20th century, was a member, along with his friend Lytton Strachey, one of the great iconoclastic writers of that generation. And they looked down from a great height on everybody else. They regarded themselves, not without some cause, as very clever indeed.
You're right. They were, in a word, insufferable.
They were pretty insufferable. Actually, reading the younger Keynes's correspondence of this subject makes you realise that a very exclusive network has a kind of nasty side to it. It was quite misogynistic. The apostles of the early 1900s certainly tended gay. Nothing wrong with that. But the kind of misogyny that accompanied that particular chapter in Cambridge history doesn't look well today. But they were primarily an intellectual group. One interesting consequence of their elitism, and that's the only word for it, was a disdain for all the conventional wisdom that Britain had inherited from the Victorians. So if you are the creme de la creme intellectually, naturally you're far too clever to believe in free trade or the gold standard or any of the things that the Victorians believed in, the British Empire. So the interesting thing about the apostles was that by the 1920s they were questioning most of the conventional wisdom of the previous generation. But what then happened, and this is really why I write about the apostles in the book, was something surprising. They got hacked by the Russians. Sounds rather like a contemporary problem. There's nothing new under the sun. The Soviet intelligence agency, the KGB, had a very ingenious strategy in the 1930s. And that ingenious strategy was to try to recruit agents, operatives, from within the commanding heights of the English establishment. And they hit on the idea, a man named Deutsch was the agent who did this, of recruiting at Cambridge and trying to get members of the apostles. And they succeeded. So that at least 3 of the Cambridge spies were members of the apostles, including Guy Burgess. And this was probably the most successful intelligence operation of the 20th century, in the sense that by getting these recruits from the exclusive intellectual elite, they got access to key institutions in the British establishment, including the intelligence services and the Foreign Office. And they had really high caliber people on the payroll supplying intelligence from the British government to Moscow in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And the quality and quantity of the intelligence were astonishing. So what does this illustrate? Well, it illustrates one important feature of networks. They're not very good at defending themselves. The apostles didn't really ever consider the possibility that the KGB would penetrate them and actually recruit members of the society to work for Soviet intelligence. But it happened. And it proved an enormous vulnerability for Western intelligence in the early phase of the Cold War, as well as in World War II. It took a great deal of effort to expose the Cambridge spies. Why was it so difficult? Was it because they were incredibly good at covering their tracks? No. They actually made lots of mistakes that should have given them away. But because they were who they were, because they had the the seal of approval of not just Cambridge University, not just Trinity College, but the apostles, people found it impossible to believe that they would be spies. And that credibility that they had from their network and the protection that they enjoyed from other members of the network, it explains why the Cambridge spies were able to operate for so long and took so long to be detected and so long to be exposed.